Okay, in this lecture, we're going to show you how to use Excel's autofill with formulas. Now, Excel's autofill can be used with formulas, just like it can be used with data entry, which we covered in an earlier lecture in this course. Now, the types of formulas that you can use with Excel's autofill are basically all the variations that we've touched on already. That is relative, absolute, or mixed references. Now, using Excel's autofill, it's super time-saving, folks, because in essence, you can just type in a formula in one cell, drag down, and it will update all the corresponding cells accordingly. So, I've got 3 examples, which I'm going to show you. One is a relative formula example, the other is an absolute formula example, and the third is a mixed formula example. And it's just to show you that in all variations, Excel's autofill will work. So, let's look at the first example. Now, here we have 2 columns, number 1, number 2. Now, I just want to add these 2 numbers together over here, and then update the rest of the cells. So, what I'm going to do is to type in equals sum, open bracket, then select these 2 numbers, and then close bracket. Now, this is a relative formula example, so I'm not going to fix any of the references. In other words, cells C16 and D16 are going to remain relative. So often when you have formulas, folks, and you've got calculations in the same row, it will be a relative formula that you will have to use. Because when you drag down, or even if you typed it in manually, downwards under the sum column, you would need to have, in order to get an accurate result, both cells in number 1 and number 2 columns, respectively, to be relative. Otherwise, you'll get the wrong calculations. Okay, so if I press enter, I get 68. Now, using Excel's autofill feature, I just click and drag down on the fill handle and then let go. There. Just to check a couple of the cells, just to show you how the formulas look like, if I click in here, you can see that we've got equals sum, open bracket, C17 to D17. Then, if I keep going down, you can see the row number is incrementing. Because remember, folks, it's a relative formula that we've typed. Okay, so that's how we use Excel's autofill to fill in cells with relative formulas. Okay, so let's look at a next example, and that's to do with using Excel's autofill with absolute formulas. Now, sometimes, folks, you need to have one variable that is fixed. In other words, that is constant, in order to carry out some calculations on a whatever table you've got, for example. So in other words, often you need the same entry on all rows. So, how can Excel's autofill be used to accomplish this task? Okay, so I've got 3 columns here. One is called amount sold, the other one is commission, and then the third one is amount to deduct. Now over here, I've got this value of 50%, which is our commission. So let's just take a hypothetical example where these are the amounts of, say, products sold, and the commission is 50%. Now we need to work out how much to deduct based on the commission. Okay, now the manual way to do this will be to type in 50% all the way down here, and then in this cell here, times this one by that one, and that will give us the amount to deduct. Okay, so rather than typing in 50% on every cell, we can just use Excel's autofill. So if we click here, press equals, and then click on this cell, this is now linking this cell to the 50%, L15 cell. Right, so in order to make this absolute, because remember, folks, if we drag this down and it's relative, it will go beyond L15. In other words, the next cell entry would be L16, which would be nothing, and we'd get some errors in our calculations, because it would keep continuing going one cell below. So, to make this absolute, we press F4, and we get L15 with the dollar signs appended to the letter, in other words, the column, and the row. Therefore, it's fixed. There. It now says 50%. So if I just click on the fill handle and drag down, you can see that it's all been entered in as 50%. Now, if I just click into each cell, you can see that it is an absolute formula because of the dollar signs. Therefore, it's now 50% on every cell. Okay, so to work out the amount to deduct, we simply press equals. Then we reference L18 multiplied by K18. Now again, folks, you could swap this all around. It's just the way that we're approaching it. In this instance, we're referencing L18 first. Now, if I press enter, we get £85.50 to deduct. Now remember, folks, the entries here are both relative, just like in the example we had here, and that's because we're carrying out a simple multiplication of one value here times one value here. Therefore, when we drag down, we need it to be replicated for all these values here within the same row. So if I drag down, there, you can see that our values have updated accordingly. Now, the beauty of this sort of setup, folks, is that because we fixed our commission as an absolute reference, if I change the commission now to say 25%, everything automatically updates. So you see, folks, how we're building in a method to actually vary our commission, and then automatically everything will update. Now, one more thing, folks. We've done the calculations separately, so we've done commission first and amount to deduct. But you can actually do both at the same time and then drag down using Excel's autofill handle. So just to show you, if I just delete these two and type that back as 50%, right. So if I reference this again, fix it, then the amount to deduct, there. So now we've got both the commission in here and the amount to deduct. So to fill in both at the same time, you simply select both cells, then use Excel's fill handle and drag down. There. You see that, folks? So that's an even quicker way of filling in this table. Okay, so let's look at another example using mixed formulas. Now, just to take the same setup that we had here with amount sold, say if we wanted to combine both the commission and amount to deduct. How do we do that? Well, again, we can use Excel's autofill once we've typed in our formula. So let's get our formula in the first instance. If I click into here and press equals, now the commission amount to deduct would basically be 50% of the amount sold. So how do we do that? Well, we've got our equals sign, so we'd simply click on here. Now we need to fix this because we don't want our percentage to change, because we want this cell to be constantly referenced for the commission. There. Then use the multiplication symbol and then click on amount sold. But we keep this bit relative. The reason being, folks, is because as we drag down, remember, our commission is fixed, but the commission amount would vary based on the amount sold. Therefore, we have to keep this bit here relative. Now, if I press enter, there, we've got £85.50, which, just to check, folks, is exactly what we got here, where we split the columns, but instead here, we're just combining it. And just use Excel's fill handle to drag down. There. You can see that we've got exactly the same numbers that we've got here. So what we did here, folks, was basically just combine these two columns together, which basically gives us the same result. Now, just a little thing, folks, which is slightly away from this topic. Because we combined the column here, in other words, we combined both commission and amount to deduct, I modified the header here to say commission amount to deduct. While over here, because we had two separate columns, this one just remained as amount to deduct. So it's just a little tip here, folks, that do pay attention to your headers, because they are important. And again, if somebody else is looking at this data and they haven't actually got an awareness of the behind the scenes going into the data, the only thing they're going to know is what you give them. So in other words, the amount sold in this case and the commission amount to deduct. So always think about the headers that you're labeling based on the actual type of formulas and data that you're entering in on your spreadsheet. Okay, so that concludes this lecture, folks. We have used Excel's autofill, and using 3 examples, we have seen how it can be used to fill in cells. The examples we've used have covered relative formulas, absolute formulas, and mixed formulas. Now, I hope, folks, that you can see just how super time-saving using Excel's autofill is. Now remember, if there are any questions or queries, please do feel free to reach out and I'll do my best to help. Okay, so I will see you in the next lecture.